The Prime Minister promised all tests like these, done in person, would get results back within 24 hours by the end of this month. The government's already pretty close to those figures. The problem comes with posted tests, which he said he couldn't guarantee and which currently make up a third of all tests.
Are you winging it, Prime Minister?
Keir Starmer suggested to the Prime Minister the government was massaging the statistics on testing and had been caught at it.
Yesterday, in a strongly worded letter to the Health Secretary, the chair of the UK Statistics Authority said that the statistics still fall well short of expectations. He went on to say, "It is not surprising that given their inadequacy, data on testing are so widely criticised and so often mistrusted." Can the Prime Minister see how damaging this is to public trust and confidence in his government?
I must say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I really do not see the purpose of his endless attacks on public trust and confidence, when what we are trying to do, and I think what the public want to hear from politicians across all parties, are clear messages about how to defeat this virus.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is confusing scrutiny for attacks. I have supported the government openly and I've taken criticism for it, but boy, he makes it difficult to support this government over the last 2 weeks.
The Labour leader suggested the Prime Minister had gone ahead with easing the lockdown, despite the fact government experts didn't think the alert level had changed.
On the 10th of May, the Prime Minister said, on the question of lifting restrictions, if the alert level won't allow it, we will simply wait and go on until we've got it right. At the time when he said that, the alert level was 4, and the R rate was between 0.5 and 0.9. We're now 3 weeks on. Some restrictions have been lifted. So can the Prime Minister tell us what's the alert level now and what's the R rate now?
Prime Minister, he knows perfectly well that the alert level does allow it.
The Prime Minister was back in Downing Street before the Black Lives Matter demonstrators gathered outside. At the daily press conference, he warned of tragic job losses ahead for many, many people, and he made a new pledge to younger workers facing unemployment.
I think it's going to be vital that we guarantee apprenticeships for young people. I think we must have a huge... We have to look after people across the board, but young people in particular, I believe, should be guaranteed an apprenticeship.
Only 1 week after he said he'd look at the idea, a promise that raises many questions about who provides these apprenticeships and at what cost.
Well, there's been mounting opposition from MPs and the airline industry to the government's plans to quarantine travellers into the UK. The former International Trade Secretary Liam Fox said it would lead to unnecessary economic isolation, while others called it a very blunt tool which effectively grounded the aviation industry. The Home Secretary insisted she had no intention to destroy any sectors of the economy. Our business and global trade correspondent Paul McNamara reports.
Leave the country soon, and this is what you're facing.
Here actually is we've got a gentleman walking towards us. What you'll notice is that it's picked up temperatures core on skin, so ideally it will aim for forehead.
Caution on the way out, and as of Monday, quarantine on the return.
Statement from the Home Secretary, Priti Patel.
It's a deeply disputed decision. This afternoon, Priti Patel told the Commons how she came to it.
Travellers from overseas could become a high proportion of the overall number of infections in the UK and therefore increase the spread of the disease. The government is therefore taking a proportionate and time-limited approach to protect the health of the British public.
The measures, which come into force on Monday, will require the majority of travellers to quarantine themselves for 14 days on arrival in the UK. There will be random checks by the authorities, and any citizens found breaking the rules could face a £1,000 fine. In England, devolved governments can set their own sanctions. Foreign travellers could be removed from the country, and there are exceptions. Visitors from the Republic of Ireland and groups like lorry drivers and fruit and veg pickers who live on farms. All measures which would have made sense, socially distanced critics said 3 months ago.
Speaker, I'm afraid I simply cannot get my head around the public health mental gymnastics of this policy. If such a barrier was required, why was it not introduced earlier in the outbreak?
The horse has bolted. I don't understand why she doesn't get this. She won't be able to screen people at the ports. She can't track them when they leave the airports.
The government say this policy is, quote, backed by science and supported by the public. adding quarantine is a public health decision made for the good of the nation and will be reviewed 3 weeks from when it's introduced. In truth, there were no real surprises today. Senior figures in the travel industry telling us they'd already accepted that they weren't going to win this battle. They didn't expect any U-turns that could potentially embarrass the government. Their hope now is that as soon as this policy is reviewed after 3 weeks, restrictions might be lifted or travel corridors announced. That way people can book holidays in July and August, essential times for the industry, and the government gets to save face. In fact, Home Office sources said to us today, they want people to start flying as soon as possible. The only problem though is that 3 weeks is a long time without people booking their holidays, and the damage done gets deeper by the day.
Well, hundreds of thousands of jobs could be lost in the next few weeks. We're putting a closed for business sign up over the UK, and virtually no one will fly for that 3-week period. But if that's what we need in order to avoid a second wave, then so be it. But we have to have a plan for what comes next.
With planes parked up by the dozen in static silence, the Ryanair boss wants to make a noise.
Please tell us what scientist has confirmed that a quarantine which allows every inbound visitor onto the London Underground or the train system is an effective or scientifically effective quarantine. It's rubbish. This is just political game playing.
For now, the Foreign Office still recommends nothing but essential travel abroad. That may change soon, but until then, booking up some summer sun remains a gamble.
The NHS Test and Trace Chief, Baroness Dido Harding, has been giving evidence to MPs on the Commons Health Select Committee today, but she would not give any details on how many people have been contacted or how quickly test results are being turned around. We'll hear from the committee chair, Jeremy Hunt, in a moment, but first our health and social care editor, Victoria MacDonald, is in the newsroom. Victoria.
Yes, this was another day, Jackie, in which we were overwhelmed with data and overwhelmed with the lack of data. And this lack of data is becoming problematic. And there were some very tetchy exchanges in the Health and Social Care Select Committee today when the new head of the test and trace system in England, Baroness Dido Harding, was called to give evidence.
What no one wants to tell us is the overall proportion of tests that come back within 24 hours. You must know that. That just can't be right. That you're telling me you don't actually know how many tests come back within 24 hours and you're in charge of NHS Test and Trace.
No, I have not had the data validated by the...
So you've got data, but it's not been validated.
I have not had the data validated by the authority who has expressed concern over previous testing data not having been validated.
Okay.
And this 24 hours or 48 hours really matters because we have been categorically told that this trace and test system, or test and trace system rather, will only work if you get these results back quickly. Now, yesterday we revealed that the early data, which Baroness Dido Harding refused to commit to today, from Thursday when the system was launched to Sunday morning, showed that only 40% of the people who tested positive had provided information about their close contacts, and only a third of those close contacts had been contacted by the tracers. So this system needs to have more people being tested and more of those contacts contacted in order to work. And actually the Prime Minister emphasised at his briefing today that there is plenty of spare capacity in the system. And let's say this is against a background of where the Office for National Statistics still believes that there are 8,000 new infections in the UK every day.
Victoria, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to the Health Committee Chair, Jeremy Hunt, and I began by asking him whether he was worried about how slowly the death rate was coming down.
The thing that's stubbornly high is the number of new infections, 8,000 or so happening every day, according to Sir Patrick Vallance. And, it looks like we've got a high number of infections still in healthcare settings, hospitals and care homes, which is causing the overall numbers to stay much higher than we want.
Now, across the community, we know that test and tracing is key. We were promised a world-beating test and trace system by June the 1st. There doesn't appear to be much evidence that that's been delivered, does there?
Well, I think it is a work in progress. One of the big things that's stopping it being a world-class system is the time it's taking to get test results back. The fact the government doesn't want to give us any numbers on that at the moment, any data, suggests to me that they're not yet confident it's happening fast enough.
Yes, Dido Harding, the head of the test and tracing system at that select committee, didn't appear to be able to give you any hard and fast numbers about how it was working. She said she could tell you some lovely stories about how it was impacting people and making them stick to the rules. I just wondered, how satisfied are you with that as an answer?
Well, it wasn't satisfactory at all, because for us as a House of Commons committee, we need to look at data. She has promised to write to us in the next week, and I think she will supply that data. I certainly hope she does.
I mean, you will have heard the reports of tracers sitting around watching Netflix, and data we got hold of last night suggested fewer than 2,000 contacts were traced by the army of 25,000 tracers in the first 3 days. That is not suggesting a world-beating system, is it?
Well, I think the reality is this is a system that was got up and running from a standing start over the last 5 weeks. And we have to recognise that there are going to be some teething problems as it gets up to speed. But I think transparency about how quickly we're turning around the tests, how many of the new COVID infections are actually being reached, how many of their contacts are being traced, that would give us all confidence.
And can I ask you, you talk about transparency there. Many people are saying there were precious few answers in the Fenton report on how COVID is impacting black and ethnic minorities, which was released yesterday, that it was redacted. There were no clear recommendations. Do you share the view of many black and ethnic minority campaigners and professionals who are looking at that report and saying, what is the point?
Well, I think it has given us some pretty important top-line data. Obviously, now I'm not in the government, I would prefer as much transparency as possible. But I do think that the fundamental picture is a very, very disturbing one.
But many people don't believe we are in a better place than we were before this report was published. Campaigners who pushed for the report say either black and ethnic minority lives matter or they don't, and that all they're left with is the grim knowledge that black and ethnic minorities are dying disproportionately, with no specific advice as to how they should live, how they should work, and that's not good enough.
Look, I'm someone who has been, as chair of the Health Select Committee, prepared to criticise the government when I haven't agreed with aspects of their strategy to tackle coronavirus. But I would say that, we are one of the few countries that has done a proper report into this issue. And I do think there is real commitment there to trying to tackle the root inequalities that have led to these very disturbing numbers.
And would you like a public inquiry, as many of those groups would?
I think when we get to the end of coronavirus, we're going to probably want a public inquiry into everything. And this will certainly be one of the key issues that will need to be addressed.
And just finally, Mr. Hunt, according to a survey in the Evening Standard, thousands of people have said they are following lockdown rules less strictly and citing Dominic Cummings as part of the reason. That must be disappointing for you, isn't it?
Well, I think it's very worrying if anyone doesn't follow the social distancing rules, but I think it is in all of our interests, whether or not you accept Dominic Cummings' explanation for what he did, it's in all of our interests to comply with those regulations, because it means that we can then put this virus behind us as a country and return to something closer to normality. So I very much hope that isn't the impact.
Jeremy Hunt, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks a lot.
Now, all schools in Wales will reopen on the 29th of June, with pupils from all year groups allowed back. But the Welsh Education Minister said schools would only be open to a third of children at any one time, with individual schools and councils in charge of managing arrangements. Some teaching unions aren't happy, saying it's still too risky, but any parents who don't want to send their children back will not be fined.